It's one of those 90s hip hop discussions. I get an email or a phone call, or sometimes both, every day about 90s hip hop and the quest, the journey on trying to find the sound, the reasons why things sound the way they do. And, someone will send me a mix or a track to be mixed and say, like, why am I not getting the sound I'm looking for? And then we'll sort of talk about what are the goals of what they're trying to accomplish sound-wise. And it inevitably goes back to somewhere around 1991 or 2 to about 1996. And I can only go from my reference of being there. And I thought of the Mobb Deep stuff that I was around, which was only like a very small session. It was like, and it turned out to be doing some vocals on Shook Ones. I don't know if those necessarily became the final vocals. The session sort of deteriorated at some point due to just, young ways. But anyway, I was trying to explain to someone that recently that there was no way that at the time any of us thought we were working on anything that was going to be looked at someday as groundbreaking. We were literally working on something that sort of, and I'm talking about the early to mid 90s, before the innocence was taken away. And I'll get to why and how that happened. When hip hop first came to the major studios, the Hit Factories and the Right Tracks, and not so much Right Track because they were still holding on to the rock pop world. Hit Factory, Sony, Quad, Battery at the time. Unique was sort of like where Unique was sort of a big studio, but it wasn't on the level of the high budget stuff. And when hip hop started to trickle in to rooms like the Hit Factory, where I was based out of, it was the work that, and I've talked about this, this was the work that no one wanted to do necessarily. Like any of the guys who had come up through the standard career path of runner, assistant engineer, recording engineer, and that meant recording or mixing. I would say 90% of those guys didn't want anything to do with hip hop. It was an unknown entity. It was like, why would you want to work on that? I want to work on pop rock, pop. I want to work on, Broadway scores, which, recording orchestras and things like that, or recording legacy artists who weren't yet quite legacy. Keep in mind, in 1993, someone that had a huge hit in 1979, that was not that long ago. It was 14 years ago. So if you look at it as in today's world, that would be like an artist from 2011. They were not legends yet, They were heading in that direction, But so 1993, a 1979 artist, 1980 artist was like, yeah, they were a big deal, but they weren't mythical creatures yet, 50 years later or whatever. So anyway, a lot of the guys didn't want to do hip hop. And who did? Well, people who were open to getting their foot in the door as an engineer with something, whatever the booking was. So that's kind of where I came in. I was a hip hop fan in the 80s going into the 90s, and a lot of that had to do with a little bit of I would say that Prince was sort of the gateway drug to the like R&B and hip hop for a guy from the New Jersey suburbs. You know, that's where I got into drum machine stuff and not wanting to do rock band things, you know, and rock had become hair bands and Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen doing Born in the USA, you know, all that kind of really corporate rock. So it wasn't interesting to me. What was interesting to me was Prince, and then this incoming thing of R&B / hip hop. And I don't know if you look into it, you'll see the evolution of R&B, pop R&B that got involved with a little bit of hip hop. There was the New Jack Swing thing I was a fan of. I liked Guy and things like that. And, you know, Guy came Teddy Riley. There was the crossover hip hop that were like the Heavy D guys and things like that were like sort of doing a combo with R&B. So anyway, there we wound up in the early 90s, mid 90s, when hip hop started to get budgets and they wanted to come to big recording studios because, you know, who wouldn't? It's sort of like the thing of, you know, well, I want to try that too. I want to go to where the fancy rooms are. You know, I've heard about them. LL Cool J was another one that was you know, sort of got you in. And when LL did Mama Said Knock You Out on MTV, that was like a crossover of rock and hip hop. Beastie Boys, obviously. Getting back to it. So when the hip hop acts started coming in, they didn't know how to make necessarily really how to make albums or records. And the engineers that they were getting, me or, you know, several other guys, let's just say there was a good 20 of us, 25 of us in New York that I could think of. A lot of us weren't the most schooled guys, so to speak. We were all hands-on guys and you know, not up-and-coming pop rock engineers at the time. So, but we had some knowledge. And then the hip-hop dudes would come in, the producers typically, or the artists. You know, they'd hand you, they'd be like, yeah, this is my track. And it'd be like, okay, there's a kick drum and a sample, maybe one other element, maybe a bass, maybe. And then, yeah, we want to do vocals of this. And we want it to sound like a record. And it's like, at the time, a lot of us who would sort of bump into each other in the hallways and stuff would be like, I got this guy who like, he comes in with a kick drum and a loop, a sample that he wants to loop or that he is looping. And he wants that to be a record. What the hell am I going to do? And that's where a lot of the mult thing came in, where you were spreading the same track across the console on multiple channels, and filtering each one of those to isolate separate elements of the sample so that you could turn the hi-hat up a little bit theoretically, and you could maybe put a little reverb on the snare, the sample of the snare within the loop. So you were filtering, you were gating, you were maybe changing the balance of the overall sample, and maybe they had someone that would come in and play a little keyboard or play a little bass, and then you did vocals, and then you mixed. And these EQs that we were using were mostly on the console because we didn't have plugins at the time, so you couldn't dial in massive quote unquote surgical EQs to do anything. You had to use the console. You might use a Pultec. And it was a whatever it takes scenario. Like the audio instructor guy would be like, what do you mean you're cutting 15 dB there and 15 dB there and boosting 15 dB on another frequency with a narrow Q? You can't do that. Well, it's like, that's the only way to, there is no can't, you can't do that. It was like, there was the only way to get to where you wanted to go. And whatever it took. So like if the channel EQ couldn't even accomplish all of what you wanted, then you might go to the extreme of putting a Pultec after that and cutting some more top end and boosting some more low end, because sometimes you were sort of trying to make something out of almost nothing. It was a limited resource sometimes. That's going to be my first chapter today on this, and I will get into the next part on the next one.